And have them both have a shared stop.
Why don't we do it right at Target?
Sorry. I was thinking in front of Ridge.
Nice.
For the two buses.
Good.
Or Sam's not working, so. Want me to hit it?
Will you?
We're live, but our cameras have. We're studio.
Okay.
Studio.
Get started then?
Yeah.
We're okay to. Okay, welcome to our city council work meeting for Wednesday, March 25th. It's gonna be a long night, so we're gonna push through. 1.1 on the agenda, review of this evening agenda. A couple of you came in, a few of us were talking a bit before about fireworks. I think there's some concerns about some fireworks spots, so I think we're gonna remove it off of.
I think you're just gonna continue, you're
Move
gonna talk
off
about
of-
it tonight.
Remove it off the consent,
Yes.
talk about it, and continue it. And kind
Sounds
of just, I mean, with a few thoughts, but really more, the thoughts are, let's give staff some instruction to go a little bit tighter, just with the gear especially we're having. So, and then they can come back with the map. We've got some time, so that's kind of the thoughts were. So again, we don't have to have a big discussion on it tonight, we're gonna just kind of point staff to get more tighter with it. So that's kind of the thought there, so. Anything else on the agenda tonight? Okay, future agenda items, 1.2.
I think Jared mentioned it last time, but maybe it'd be nice in a work meeting to have an overview about the athletic complex, or maybe Matt, maybe you feel good about that. Would that be helpful, or like I can meet then with someone on my own to just get all the basics and have all the
I think
information?
we could do why don't we plan one,
Uh-huh.
an overview in the meeting, overview of the athletic complex in a work meeting, just so that we start to talk about
If
it.
that's one of our goals as a council, I think it'd be good to roll.
Yep.
That we were talking about, see, absolutely. Okay. Okay, 1.3, council discussion of future citizen recognitions.
Tara, the scholarships, we talk about wanting to recognize the winners of the scholarships.
Have you ever done that in city council before, or only
Yeah,
in
I
high
think we
school?
usually do that.
Okay, great.
When is that selection?
Let's see, May 18th, right? Was
I
that,
just signed some
was
certificates.
the high school thing, I don't know, would you do it before or after the
They've,
high school?
we've
team?
selected them,
Oh, okay,
they've been selected now,
that's up to you.
So anytime from now till.
anytime after the 18th.
It's
They
like,
don't-
is
they won't know
18th the
until
big, is the
18th is
announcement?
that's when they're presented at the
Okay.
18th, so they would get that, they wouldn't know before that night.
Okay,
don't
so
tell
it's
them
until
that.
after.
They don't tell them that night.
I was just
Um,
surprised, why is it in the high school
So I
at all?
have inside information right now.
You do.
Because each, I mean, just wherever the award winners are from,
Mhm.
since they've always been in Mountain Ridge, they do it part of their
Ceremony,
their
their-
big
Oh, so
awards.
it'd be the first week of June.
I think that's neat, but I was just surprised it
already
wasn't
know.
just a city thing,
Oh,
cause
our
it's not
meeting would
really
be the
anything to do with the high school, right?
We'd be on the 20th, we'd have to do it.
Right.
The first meeting of June.
It's just good to acknowledge them. that
Which
they
is after high
should
school.
give
Yeah,
the
it's-
students
yeah.
and talent scholarships.
Have you been to one of those at the high school? You've been to one of those,
Yeah.
because you're talking.
What day is that?
18th, May 18th.
May 18th.
So Matt and I are gone.
So we could only, in theory, you couldn't do it till June 10th then.
Cause our meeting's the 20th,
Yeah.
they could do it, it'd just be recognitions. We wouldn't have to
We wouldn't
prepare
put
any
any
staff
names,
reports or
we would just say
anything.
recognition, yeah, we could probably try and get it on the 20th as well.
Yeah, tell them on the 18th to come on the 20th too.
Yeah.
When they find out that night.
That work, Nathan?
Yeah.
Would
I think
it
it's,
hurt
you
for
just keep
them?
it, I was just worried about having to
I
write
know,
a report and put their names in it if they weren't.
yeah.
Well, I think
How do we
Tara's
do that?
making a good point, it's a city thing, we can award them prior to that date,
And then
cause if
it's
it's chosen, then they can be
still
re-recognized on the
referenced
18th.
there.
Why are we giving the schools the first right of
Again, I only know, but
Yeah.
for being there at the school, that's, everything there's a surprise. They invite the kids there that night, and everything that night is a surprise. None of them know what they're getting.
True.
So the chamber does an event, award that night. They do, scholarships at each high school. So it just, honestly, it fits for us to be there. It really does. I
Okay.
agree with what you're saying, but it does fit. If they're Harriman, they have a separate one too, but recently the winners have all been from Mountain Ridge.
Okay.
But, so it really just fits in with that night. That whole night is awarding of scholarships, so it really, and it's nice for you, for one of us to get in front of the parents, the whole parent, cause it's not just those 3 students, you get in front of all the Mountain Ridge. So it's really a good opportunity for the city to be in front of those,
Okay.
the parents too.
So we can shoot for the 20th. We'll plan on just having a generic statement on the 20th agenda. If for some reason it doesn't work, if they tell you that, we'll just put it on the 10th as well.
Okay, perfect.
Because
you
that's
were-
just 2 days' notice for
Right.
the scholarship winners,
Right.
so, in May.
And I did reply to your email, well, can you speak that much, since you can be there?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Just a couple minutes, it's just, yeah. Okay, love it. Okay, we'll go down to 2.1, discussion of the department requested fiscal year 2027-2028 budget for public safety. Kyle?
Thank you, Mayor. Do want to acknowledge we do have our interim chief and then our 2 commanders here tonight to help answer questions as we move along the discussion. They did come back early from a conference, so I am very appreciative of that. And plus you'll probably get better answers from.
You saved us. Conference was going a little dry.
Now it works. Yep. Okay, thank you. Just from a very high level, what staff's goals tonight are is reviewing, of course, the proposed budgets. Any items that you as a council need additional information on that we aren't able to answer at the discussion tonight. Any fundamental disagreements you have over items in the budget, we would certainly want to know that. And then as staff, we do want to revisit the property tax philosophy that we have set up for the HCC. We've now had this philosophy in place for a couple of years, and we just wanna make sure we're on the same page and bring up some items as staff that we've noticed that weren't necessarily thought of when we initially set the philosophy up. And just as a really, really quick background, I know many of you have heard this, but I also think it's good just for the public. So how property tax works in the state is we receive the same amount of funding as we did the prior year, plus any additional revenues for new growth that occurs within the city. So if a new business building is built, or if we have new homes built, we do receive the additional money that those properties bring in. And as of another note, police is funded by a separate taxing district, so those funds are dedicated solely to public safety. And you'll notice that as we go through the budget, we have a portion that we call SEA or HCC for short, HCC funded, and then the portion that's funded by just general tax dollars, some of the other services that the police department provides. So just a quick overview of the organizational chart for police. This would be the chart. We will discuss a couple of new positions that are being proposed. This would be with those additions in place. So as you can see, it's broken up into 3 divisions: an administrative, operations, and special services division. Currently, the FTE count is 50. That includes both sworn and civilian. And then we will discuss the proposals to add additional personnel. That, I do have that in red for the 27, and then 28 is an additional FTE. So with that, just an overview of the police department budget. As you can see, for fiscal year 27, the proposal is to increase expenditures a little over $1 million, almost 1.1 million. As you can see, the majority of that increase is due to personnel, and we will get into that in a minute. Of note, the personnel requests are being requested using the new growth money, and as we discussed, that is being set aside for expenditure increases that are due to growth, and we have narrowed that down to hiring additional officers as needed based off of certain trigger points that are set up in a growth silo model that I know most of the council has seen already. In addition, fiscal year 28 has $815,000 increase, or 7%. And then that first green line at the bottom shows how much revenues and that's mainly property tax revenue from the HCC, is short from covering the requested expenses by about $496,000 for fiscal year 27. And then fiscal year 28, it's a little over $1 million. And this is just a what if that entire amount that we're short to cover the expenses was funded by a property tax increase. It would be a 4.67% increase in 27, and fiscal year 28 would be 5.15%. And those are just to give you a basis of what that would look like. So moving on to the biggest chunk of the budget, which would be the personnel. So there are a few requests for personnel. So we'll first talk about the commander request. So this would cover the administrative division, would also cover community services, the emergency management function, and also internal affairs. And it would be funded by HCC, so police would be 40%. And then the fire district, because of the emergency management function, at 25%. And then the general fund would cover the other 35%. In addition, using the growth funding, there is a request for a sergeant, and that is to help balance some of the supervisory responsibilities. I did include the memo that the police department had drafted formally requesting these positions. That does go into greater detail on why the sergeant position is needed when necessarily a metric hasn't been triggered within the growth silo. And then, so those are the 27 positions, and then in fiscal year 28, there is a request for an officer because growth silo metric 2.1 has been triggered, which is 60% of priority 1 calls being answered in less than 6 minutes. And as you can see at the top, it does show you the total cost for that. Salary and benefits, and then operating equipment. The first year is substantially higher because of the vehicle that's needed for the position, as you can see. What we do is, once that vehicle's been purchased, we do return the funds the following year back into that growth funding. So it's not like $115,000 is going out every year. We do recognize that that's a one-time cost. Looking while we're in personnel, there are a few adjustments and requests. So personnel related. So one is the cost of living adjustment that we've discussed about citywide, and that is the 3.21% COLA number that we are using citywide. If this was to be funded wholly by a tax increase, that would be a 2% increase. It's also 42% of the shortage between revenues and expenses in the police department. The next, I believe Trevor called them trapezoids, and I think he's correct. The next trapezoid is step increases. So as you are aware, we do have a step program for the police department. So every year, as long as the officer qualifies, they would move to the next step in their program. Once they have reached the top step, there is no additional step. So at that point, what they would receive is the COLA, because of the COLA shifts the entire range. And that's 26% of the shortfall, and then it'd be a tax increase of 1.3%. Oh, sure.
So the step increases aren't merit-based, they're just,
Correct.
That's
they're just
Correct, they're
automatic?
timed.
They're tied to the time and grade, correct.
Okay.
And third trapezoid is market adjustments. So there's a few of these. As you know, we do a salary survey periodically, and we also look at how the grades and positions are within the department, along with comparing with other comparable agencies. And we were experiencing compression issues between the chief, deputy chief, commanders, and sergeants positions. So part of the majority of the market adjustment is to relieve those compression issues to make sure there is enough room between each of those positions.
So I might say, we, in our ultimate structure, have a lieutenant between our commanders and sergeants. And right now, the sergeants and the commanders' salaries are so close, there would be no room for a lieutenant. And so, that's some of the things we start looking at as we grow from a supervisory. Eventually, we'll have 2 patrol groups. I say southeast and northwest kind of break up, and then you have a watch commander or lieutenant over that. Right now in our structure, for varieties, we saw such run-ups in our police, our officers and sergeant salaries, and our commanders and the admin staff didn't go up at the same rate. And so we're just now hitting into some compression issues where if we opened up a lieutenant's position, I don't think anybody in their right mind would take it, would be a pay cut.
Well, Nathan, let me ask you, Cody, you can step in too. This is just, you guys know where we all stand. We love support. I mean, this is number one for us, right? Public safety is priority one. I struggle every time we go through this, like, you're supporting what we're doing, right? But then being careful that we don't.
Our
we're
job
all
is to ask
critical.
questions.
Right, yep. How do we get, how do we ensure, I know we've talked about these silos and these, the numbers. And I know, you and I talked early on, right, not necessarily just PD, but even just in general with the city, we've done things because we've always done it a certain way, right? We're trying to get away from that, right? How do we make sure we don't get top heavy? That's why I'm so worried about becoming top heavy, just because that's where the salaries are, that's where, like, I hear about the different,
Well, if we go back a slide, you'll see that even your irregular officers, $200,000 a year.
Right.
So if we go forward,
I'm
one of the
actually gonna
things,
go back to the count too. I think the
Oh.
count might help.
yeah, I mean, if you look, you're
And again, I'm not saying we're there yet, right? I'm just saying.
It's a legitimate concern, but what we have done in the last 8 years or so as we've grown the department is we haven't addressed the leadership structure. And we've added the animal services piece and the code enforcement piece and additional pieces to that, all under the current structure, the current leadership structure, and really it's started to stretch our leadership structure to the point where we're getting some task saturation, some potential failure points that need to be addressed. So yeah, it's certainly a legitimate concern and one that we pay attention to, but over the last 8 years, we really haven't grown the leadership structure like we've grown the department.
So in thinking about that, in conversations with several of you, I had Cody put together kind of, well, what's an org structure look like once a department gets to a certain size? And we've gone through one draft. I think in addition to your silos model, what we need to do is have a structure that it's like grayed out. We know we can add officers. There is a point where supervision becomes an issue. If you don't have it, your liability as a city goes up if something happens. So it's understanding, it's not just, adding an officer because the calls are up. That can have a ripple effect eventually. Like I said, now we're gonna have 2 patrol teams because the city's big enough. Well, from a supervision and making sure we're balancing all that, it's not the sergeant doing it. The sergeants are running their teams. It's now another level. So I'm as concerned about being top heavy, but I think we also, police is one of the ones where you do have probably a more traditional, like 5 to 7 direct reports is all you would ever get. Some other departments, you can go broader than that, but because of your liability in that structure. So I think what I want to do eventually is to have just kind of a generic structure. Doesn't mean that's what will be,
Right.
but just as something for you to think about, okay, well, now we're at this spot where this council or future council, they can look at it and say, okay, we know when we hit these triggers, we're also gonna have to talk about the supervision, right, piece.
And we talked in 2023 when this body adopted the growth silo model, we talked about the supervision structure because it wasn't included in that initial draft. We looked at metrics and triggers associated with the line level FTEs that would need to be added as we grew. But we did have a brief conversation about this model is going to have to evolve. And one of those pieces is the supervision. And if you look at the sergeant and the detailed report that's in the staff report, the supervisory span of control is the primary driver for that request for the sergeant allocation specifically as it relates to the SET team, who are out doing great work, and they're doing a tremendous job, but that's a high liability unit if we don't have somebody that has the time to pay attention to what's going on there. So that supervisory span of control is a balancing act for sure. But once you get to that, 5 to 7 direct reports range, and the additional administrative tasks associated with running the department, you run the risk of some additional liability if you're not paying attention to it.
So if I understand, your current silo structure as it stands now doesn't factor in the supervision or doesn't adequately account
Correct.
for it. And
Yeah.
the silo's gonna be reworked to,
I think what we need is just like we call them silos, they're these growth factors that we're looking at. It's like, okay, we're starting triggers, we should add an officer. What we need is something that sits either overarching or under that we know as we start to add this number of officers, we're going to start triggering some supervision challenges or saturations. We have to do something with some sort of trigger when we all of a sudden, hey, they're doing fine, because a lot of this is investigations, right? We're doing fine, we're burying that individual. We really need to break it up and do some things,
And
as well as
it's-
the structure.
There has to be a metric associated with it still, right? Because we're still focused on being data driven. The metric when it relates to supervision just might not be as black and white as calls for service or number of cases assigned and some of these other metrics that we've put into the growth silo model. So our intent is to bring you an updated draft of that as we work through the budget process over the next couple of months that you can then re-adopt that will address some of the supervision and some of the other pieces that we knew we would have to add from the original draft of the document that was passed in '23.
It's a great question though.
Well, I think
It's
that's
a concern I
the other
think
part
we're
of my
looking
question too was what is that span of, are we, and you answered, right, the 5 to 7, right, that's kind of where.
Depends on the assignment, but
Right.
typically 5 to 7. If on the administrative side, we can stretch it a little bit because those tasks aren't necessarily as high liability, but certainly in a patrol element or an active investigations unit like the SET team, 5 to 7 is pretty much a national standard.
And 7 would be pushing that ability to do it well.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, do we get to a point where we push up against 7 one year, but then the next trigger is that we're creating that,
I think
then we're
that's what
creating the
we're-
next supervisory level, right?
I think that's what we're wrestling with, is how do we do that, and it's not quite as black and white, because it may not be always
Fluid
7,
enough,
it may be, hey, we're at 5, we see it going to this, but it's a really high liability area.
Right.
And so, we're gonna add something and maybe we drop to 4 for a while, knowing that as we grow, we're trying to
Go
build
under
the
that new
structure,
leadership.
the foundation, to do that, so.
what does high liability mean? Like, why 5 to 7?
Todd could talk about that for a long time, I'm sure, but in public safety in general, the two things that agencies and cities typically get sued over the most is failure to train and failure to supervise. So those are our two highest liability areas when you look at police incidents across the country. And so the failure to supervise really comes down to, do you have adequate procedures and operational controls in place to address decisions and behaviors of officers as they're occurring instead of having to find out about them after the fact, right? So when you have a supervisor who has the time, because they don't have 8 to 10 direct reports, to spend time with their people while they're out working, then you're much more likely to find those issues in an early intervention stage and get ahead of potential behavioral or decision problems, as opposed to an officer who never sees their sergeant and, is continually making poor decisions or having negative interactions with the community, and then it comes to a fester point or a boiling point where there's an incident that happens and then we're investigating, an excessive use of force claim or something like that could have been addressed previous to, if we had a supervision structure in place that could identify those behaviors early on.
So is that like available on the phone if you're in the middle of something? Is that like what that means, or is talking through a case afterwards?
Both, there's certainly elements of both. We do spot audits, our sergeants are watching body camera video, but really the best way to model public safety supervision is for the sergeant to be out with their folks while they're doing the job.
Okay, so,
Their intent is to be on scene as things are happening, particularly with a high liability unit like the set unit that are writing search warrants for residences, they're seizing vehicles, they're doing drug investigations. As those things are happening, to have a supervisor who's not directly involved in the investigation, who can step back and say, are we going down the right path? Are we making sure we're doing things the right way? But that's active and ongoing as opposed to after the fact, us sitting, trying to Monday morning quarterback it in the conference room.
okay, that's really helpful, thank you.
I don't wanna stretch this out anymore than it needs to be, but 23 was 3 years ago now. We have 2 new council members, so if you'll indulge me. What we did at that time, what they're referring to, what happens most of the time, and we had a brief conversation about this at Chief's lunch the other day. What happens with most service areas, so go back to when we were in Slavisa or in UFSA. Listen, sitting right behind you, so I can keep catching my eye as I look over there. Part of the issue with the taxing district is that that's the only source of revenue. So what most political bodies do is they don't wanna raise taxes every year. They don't want to be, for lack of a better word, they don't want to be as transparent as probably we all want them to be, because it's not popular to look at it every single year. So we get the same amount of money from the number of properties that we got last year. The only increase in revenue is from any new homes that come in, right? So there's new property tax to come in. Only we maybe don't have enough of them to warrant hiring more officers, right? So we're getting a little bit more revenue, but we don't really have the need to increase the service level. So what they typically do is take that new growth money and put it towards the inflationary costs, right? So it just kind of disappears when we've got this money, so we spend it. And then we reach a tipping point with that growth where we do need to increase the number of people out there to increase the service level. Well, now instead of doing a smaller, incremental, now we've got to do a great big increase of 20-30%, because if we need to hire one shift, we just talked about that, how many people is that? 7, right, at $300,000 per, that's a whole bunch of money to come up with, and it's gonna be a pretty major tax increase for that, plus the inflation on top of it, and that's where you get to the 20% numbers that you see from the county and the school district and everything else. So what we attempted to do, and I've said this ever since then, and this is a little bit, everybody I know looks at me as a little bit of my brainchild, and I said it at that time, and I said it in every conversation since then. I look at these things as kind of we know what we have already, our current structure, but then we're building a skeleton plan onto it, right? So we're looking ahead to see these are the needs we're gonna have, so we're building out that skeleton plan, and then as those needs come up, then we can put the meat onto it, which is the gray area. So we also wanted to have some metrics. So what we did is we separated. We said, all right, we recognize what we need to catch up on. We'll do that with our tax increase, but then from here on out, we're gonna separate it. We're gonna restrict that, and any new growth money is set aside. It can't go into the current budget and pay for other things. It's set aside for the purpose of hiring new officers when we need them. And then we also gave them the direction to come up with some metrics, right? What are some points, some trigger points that we hit that are indicators that we need to start looking at hiring more of those people, so that way we have the funds that are there when we hit those triggers and we need them. We have the funds that can hire them, instead of saying, okay, now we need to go, it's gonna be a year and a half before we can really hire them, because we've gotta go through the truth in taxation, increase the tax, and then wait another 6 to 12 months to actually collect the money. So that whole process, I believe, is pretty innovative. I don't know of anybody else that has done it so far. I think the framework has worked well, but now we need to adjust it and say, okay, the bones of that are pretty good, but now we're seeing how we need to tweak it along the way. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that's why when we talk about the philosophy, we wanna talk about maybe some of the things we're seeing as we've been living it. I actually think it works really well when we're talking about hiring. That part has worked well. There are some other pieces we'll get to where it's like, oh, we didn't think about that. How do we want to address it? So, and that's really your level. So we want to have some of that conversation tonight so we know how to move it forward.
So by separating that and saying we're not gonna use that new growth money to pay for the COLA or pay for the step increases, then we need, if we're not gonna use that new growth money for it, then we need to look at doing that increase each year. And can we put that on our residents to make that increase, or are there other things that we can do?
So with the set aside money for the new growth and meeting the need for the new officer, do we have enough data yet to know as a percentage when we do need to hire that next officer? What percentage,
So the
is
metrics,
is it covering 80% of that new officer? Or is it,
Which part?
so for the money that we're holding back for growth, when we need that new officer, is the money that we've held back take care of 100% of that?
That, so in theory, yes, that if we don't have it, we can't hire, so.
Okay.
But it doesn't come in like in one officer increments. And that the cost of those officers you saw were all different depending on what we're hiring.
Sure.
And it's not just the 191, it's the vehicle, and then each year after that, we have to hold back the amortized cost of the vehicle to go to the, so. Yes, if we didn't have enough money in there to hire, you would have to have a different conversation. So I would say, yes, it's to cover what we're going to hire until maybe it doesn't, then we'll have to talk to you.
Yeah.
So the theory is that's what we're trying to do.
and then into the next year, so I think is what Cody was trying to say for a second there was, so we put that money aside. Let's say that we have enough, so it's been 18 months and we haven't hired anyone, we've collected all that new money. The need hasn't been there, well, now we're seeing that the need is either there, it's going to be there, so we need to start deploying that and bringing the people in to train them, cause it's not, again, to hire one shift, to have one more officer on patrol, we're talking 7 people, not 1. So it's a pretty big number, and it's a pretty big task to hire them and train them and adjust all of those logistics. So it takes a little bit of time, but from a financial point of view, if we've set that money aside, when we go to hire that person and that money's there, it's there to hire them and pay for their equipment up front. Well, then the next year, we have a COLA and we have a step, right? And those inflationary increases, and we still only get the same amount of money, right? From those new homes that paid for the one time. So that adds to our overall inflation number. So our discussion every year now is, right, we need to adjust those things, but yeah, we have to look at the inflationary costs, and that's our tax increase each year, which at least I think is a much more sustainable approach and easier to explain to the residents. And we can break it down like this and say, here's the increase, I've got good people, and here's the next part of it for me, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much, but when we look at our pay structure, we're not the top and we're not the bottom, I think we're in kind of in the 60th percentile. We pay, I think we pay well for in those positions. Our fringe benefits are as good, if not better than average in a lot of cases, I think. The way that these guys have built the department, we don't have any open allocations, that's pretty rare.
Culture's a big thing.
So the way we're doing it is good, and we could look at this and say, no, we need to cut the COLA, we need to cut the steps, but then that chips away at that sustainable level of service and what we've built there. So I agree, and I'm the first one to always do it, I mean, is to push back and say, what do we need? But that's kind of what we rely on them to do through the process before they bring this to us. And my conversation with Nate, and that has happened to my understanding. And then we get to push back a little bit more.
And I would say,
Does that help?
correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, Cody,
Like you're good.
the set aside isn't necessarily just to pay, it is, but it's really to keep it from going into the budget, so it doesn't become, it's
We
really.
can choose whatever we wanna do with it.
Right, but it's really, we're trying to keep that from becoming an operating thing, cause it really is, that's how we're trying to fund the growth.
One-time money.
You know, we don't, it's that, back to that one-time money.
One-time money.
Cause that was
So we-
in my initial explanation, right, so I don't wanna pick on anyone in particular, but I'll say, we'll say Slavisa. Cause we're way out of that but when you're part of that taxing district, that's how they all operate, school districts, I mean, every city, the county, et cetera. That new growth goes in and that's just part of the budget and they're like, great, let's spend that money. And so Mayor's point, that's what, the number one thing we're trying to do is, yeah, we're not going to just spend the money because it's there. We wanna build a budget for the things that we need and make sure that we can sustain our level of service as we grow.
We were a little bit lower than the market. We're down probably around the 50th percentile right now, and the original COLA that was proposed by HR actually would have pushed us almost to the 85th percent. It was pretty high.
95th, so
As Nathan and I talked, we came off of that pretty substantially, but this COLA puts us right about back to that 60 to 64th percentile.
yeah, so. It kind of depends what other cities are doing, but the one thing that I hope the residents recognize is that that new growth money, those are new homes, new businesses, they also request services. And so that money can't just go to keep the same number you have unless you're doing large increases. The one large increase we did do in this fund was to try and get it to a flat line, catch up. And one of the things that we do for like their vehicles, we have a smoothing number. We look at how many vehicles they have, what those costs are, how many years, and we're trying to set that aside so it's not a big hit to the city every time we have to buy.
So as part of that, we created a capital plan, right, so vehicle replacement.
So there's a lot of that structure there, and as I said, I think it works really well. We'll talk, there are a few things as we get to it, like, how do we deal with this? And that's really, I think Kyle's gonna hit it here. Kind of hold him off his.
Before we leave this slide, I did just want to note the merit, so that is for our civilian employees and then our salaried administrative staff that don't participate in the STEP plan. In 28, the numbers are fairly similar, however, the step increases actually went down because we've had more people hit the top of their step. But the tax, if it was to be funded with a tax increase, it's about the same amount, 3.4%. I do want to note, we have seen this in the past, and it's one thing as staff kind of raised our flag is the tax increase for personnel is already above a normal COLA. You know, our COLA is 3.21%, we're already at 3.4 just with basic personnel increases. And these are like the major increases we saw back in the 2020s when the salary rush began. It's just something to note that we noted as we started going through the numbers.
And the step increase number will fluctuate year to year because it depends on how many people we employ that are in the step plan. So our step plan is a 10-year plan, so after 10 years of experience, they are considered topped out, and then any increase they get comes from the COLA line. When we started, pretty much everybody was topped out because we had to hire a bunch of really experienced officers to get us off the ground. As we've moved forward, we're back to about 50% probably in the step plan, which is a good thing because that equates to longevity, right? About half of our sworn staff is 10 years or experience or less. And so we're hiring people that are gonna be here for the long term. So that number, depending on, people leaving or retiring and then who we hire and where they're at in the step plan, that number might go up or down, year to year.
Do you find that people leave after 10 years though, when they're topped out?
Not generally, no, not generally. Usually it's about
Segue into-
3 to 5.
Yeah, it's a good segue into why there's a step plan.
Yeah.
Which is,
It's about 3 to 5 years, is usually if officers are gonna leave and go to a different agency, that's about the time that we see it. The way the step plan is structured provides, an additional incentive at year 6. So if you look at the step plan, the jump between step 4 and step 5 and then step 5 and step 6 is pretty substantial. Because we're trying to incentivize that, beyond 5 years, and then statistically, once, unless there's some major issue that happens or substantial disciplinary reason, 6 to 10 and then 10 plus, it's pretty rare for somebody to go somewhere else between 10 and 20, but there are always those strange cases. Every one of us left our previous agency and came here
Right.
between 10 and 20, except for BA. It was a little more than that, but yeah, so it's we're trying to incentivize them to build a career path here, right? And that's why everything we do is officer focused. We're giving them a path to work forward.
And just about any industry that you're in, kind of the statistics are about the same, right? When you're, if it's a career versus a job. We'll get into the weeds on that, but once you get to kind of that 10th year you've gotten through kind of that startup phase and you're at that kind of average wage level, plus in the government sphere of things, and you have the COLA, the fringe benefits are pretty substantial, right? So that's the career path. Once you're there, pay is pretty decent at that point, and you can see the path forward with a good COLA structure. I won't bore you with why we did what we did with that. But then you add in the other benefits. Retirement is huge, right? When you get to that point, then they start looking at what those numbers are, what that pension will be when they get those number of years. That's a pretty big driver. And then the city has a really good fringe program with health benefits, et cetera. I mean, the actual cost, if we were to break that down, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but I mean, the stuff I've looked at for fire as we've dug through that budget, and I think our benefits are maybe a little bit better, but the salary is one thing, but then you can easily add about 40% on top of that for those other benefits. I mean, it's real money.
And in public safety, at least in our experience in Utah, the salary and the benefits are a driver, but they're not the primary driver. The primary driver of longevity and employment is actually culture. So we're able to stay at around that 60th percent. There are some agencies, if they're not the top paid out, nobody would work there, right? But we spend a lot of time focused on building good culture, a good work environment, which is why we don't carry any vacancies. We're able to make that work at the 60th percentile or around there, because it's a great place to work and our people enjoy being here.
Moving on to the operating side, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the larger increases, and then I also did want to highlight some decreases that the police department is recommending. So the largest is our dispatch expense. So of course we use we have an interlocal for our dispatch. That is going up a little over $60,000 next year, which is about a 15% increase. If equating it to a tax increase, it's about 0.57%. Not a whole lot they can do about it. Luckily, we do have representation on the board that do push back on some of the requests from the dispatch agency. Clothing and uniforms is another item. One thing we noted is going through the budget, and this is something all of the departments do. They actually go line by line and re-examine everything that they are purchasing. That uniform line had not increased in a very long time. I don't know if it actually has increased since
we started.
inception. So they've added officers, costs have gone up. So it was time to recommend an increase on that.
If you guys wore shorts, it's half the material.
Troy will roll over in his grave and come back and haunt me.
It's the same material on me.
Yeah.
And then software costs are increasing. But I did wanna note, they did request a reduction in their general supplies and then also fuel.
That still gives us about a 18% cushion above what we're actually spending. We obviously didn't have great data when we started, and Monty spent a lot of time going through what that might look like. And over the last couple of years, as we've looked at kind of the futures, and even right after COVID, when we were pushing $5 a gallon, our budget was still in a pretty good place. So we're confident with this reduction that we'll still be all right.
It's impressive, you're only 150,000 for last year.
Looking forward to fiscal year 28, we are forecasting at least another 11%, 12% increase in dispatch. Of course, we don't have the numbers yet. The department is requesting an increase in overtime, seminars, training, and travel, which they have cut back or limited the past number of years. And it's important to keep the officers trained and up to standards. In addition, general supplies up 16%. Once again, as we saw, they did cut this current request, and then last biennium, they did also cut their general supplies at that point too. And then we're also anticipating software costs going up again based off of the contracts we have in place on that. This isn't necessarily the capital project discussion, but I do like to highlight some of the things, especially because there will be a lot of data in the capital project discussion. They are requesting 13 vehicle replacements for 27 and then another 9 for 28. And just as a reminder, those are coming out of the vehicle replacement fund that was set aside a few years ago. And we'll go over where the tax increases have gone and what they were allocated for. And then they're also requesting replacement of their Faro equipment. It's reached the end of its useful life. And then a light trailer. One note on those two is we have had a mental health position that was part of the original tax increase. That position, as you know, has not been hired. We would recommend using 80,000 of that funding because we've been saving that 82,000 a year, using 80,000 of one-time money for those two equipment replacements.
So are there plans to try and get a mental health specialist? Is that a priority?
Yes,
Even like a half-time one or something?
this is one of those that is a little bit different, a significantly different landscape than it was even a couple years ago. The state has made some significant financial investment in mental health in the last couple of years that have really helped drive our repeat mental health customers to resources and people that can actually help them. So we've seen our mental health numbers actually trend down, which is a great thing. I do feel like that position will be needed in the future, but it's not an emergent need right now. It was originally budgeted, we had somebody hired there, she did a great job, and we don't, the position is not for, we don't do in-house like counseling service, we're not providing mental health services. It really was a case manager to essentially be a liaison for resources between us and all the mental health resources that are available through the county and the state. We talked before about the mental health piece. We'll never get out of the business of going the first time when somebody's in crisis, right? What we're trying to do is the second and third and the fourth time, instead of them calling 911, they have resources and people that they can talk to. So that triage is actually happening fairly organically with the advent of the 411 and the apps and Safe UT and all the rest of it that the state has made some substantial investment in. And we do feel like it's actually making a difference. So I do think that person as kind of a triage caseworker will be needed in the future, but we don't have the same emergent need that we had 4 or 5 years ago when we first added that position.
Moving our discussion now just to property tax in general. So we are estimating that HCC will collect approximately 10.6 million in tax revenue, so that is an increase of 4%. Property tax is very tricky to estimate just because we don't necessarily know what the amount is going to be assessed, and it's usually a 2-year tax cycle before we see the full amount from a new build. So we do estimate conservatively, especially since we do recognize that this funding is going to fund positions, and it's not good to budget 15% and go oopsie, because you don't want to have to lay off a person because of a mistake of being too aggressive. We do have, going back to Councilmember Basham's question about the restricted account, we have a little over $1 million in that fund balance right now, and it is split between that mental health specialist, and that is after taking the 80,000 out if the council is agreeable to that. And then we have about 720,000 of new growth funding still available, even after if the sergeant and commander positions and the officer position is approved. I did also want to know, because I do know the council in the past has been cognizant of CPI and wanting to keep increases around CPI. I did list out if the budgets were approved as is, the amount of the tax increase that would be needed above CPI is 1.46% in 27, and then 1.94 in 28, and that's assuming the same CPI for both years. We won't know until December what our next CPI number is. And then just sorry.
Sorry,
You're good.
another question. So I was wondering about the fiscal year 28 budget, like what are the pros and cons for adding the extra officer for 28 now as opposed to coming back in a year and like seeing where the need is at and making a budget adjustment next year?
That's actually why it's in 28. That trigger under the growth silo model has actually already been met. And that's our 60% of priority one calls, response time less than 6 minutes. And we can certainly talk if you'd like about how that number came to be. We did a lot of work with GIS to figure out how fast it would get us to, or what would take us to get from one side of the city to the other. And essentially, as we work through our appropriate resource allocation and deployment, it's about 6 minutes. We should be able to get to any priority one call in less than 6 minutes. And that includes the dispatch time, right? Our actual drive time is about 2.5 minutes, but when somebody calls 911, they spend the first couple minutes on the phone with the dispatcher. And even though that's not a number that's within our direct control, we're still accountable to the residents for it. So our 60th percentile on the priority one calls right now is a little over 6.5 minutes. And so that trigger has already been met. However, the council added an FTE for us last year for peak time deployment to try and address that number. Well, we saw that it was trending that way. Due to some internal challenges and some staffing turnover, we really haven't had somebody in that position consistently enough to get good data as to whether or not that peak deployment is helping that number. And so while the trigger is met, we don't feel comfortable saying we have to add somebody right now, and so that's why it was put into the 28 budget. We do see that trend continuing, particularly as we, like Nathan said, we're starting to get, as we build homes both in Olympia and out south, we're starting to stretch a little bit, and so that priority one call response time will be an important one for us to pay attention to in the future. And there is the anticipation if that number continues to trend or our peak time deployment doesn't meet or doesn't address the trigger over the next 12 months, that we may potentially come to you and ask for a second allocation in 28. But we only put the one in there, which technically could be, it meets the trigger now, but we don't think that it's the right time for it. So we're gonna push it to the 28 budget. We're gonna put somebody in our peak car and see what that does to the priority one call response time and see if that trigger still exists next spring-ish. We'll bring that back to you for that further conversation before we decide to add that officer allocation in the 28 budget. We wanted to project it so that you had an accurate view of what the number might look like. But we'll come back and have that conversation with you before they're added to the staffing model.
I don't wanna speak for anyone else, but at least for me on the financial side of it, when we talk about the trigger, that's just kind of the metric put in place that is a trigger for them to be able to come to us and say, all right, this is the justification for why we need more. It doesn't mean that we necessarily need it right now. It's an indicator that we're going to need to add someone, and then you do the work that you just talked about.
The trigger is intentionally put on this side of the need so that it elicits the conversation. And then really the first conversation we have is with Nathan to make sure that we're on the same page, that he feels that there's a need before we would bring that to you. But yeah, the trigger is intentionally set to occur prior to the need existing.
And I would say that was Chief Carr's final good idea. He said, why don't you guys call it a forecast if we're not sure?
Yeah.
So that's why you're seeing it
Yep.
in there. Give him a hard time. He was busy doing something else, and we're having this conversation, and then he pipes up. 'Cause he had like 2 days left.
And I will just
He was
say
there
since my office is next to HR, it can be a quite lengthy process to recruit. So it does also help HR plan with police when the best time to open the position is to.
So if we get to the next year and we've set aside money for this, but we don't need it, what happens to the money?
It stays in
It's
restricted
restricted.
Just wait.
for the next.
Because
For
we're
the
going
next
to
one.
need it, yeah.
Okay,
So it would get added to that 723,000 and just sit in that restricted fund until there is a justifiable need.
okay, thank you.
I would say, before you move on to the next slide, that 0.3% increase for operating costs is notable. Like, that's, just goes to.
Eventually they'll have to go up. I think they've done a really really good job of trying to hold the line.
Yeah.
That's part of what we wanna talk about with the philosophy, is that there are some things that are outside of our control that start to increase, that we either, it could be inflation, it's not always inflation, sometimes it's, hey, one of the requests in there for some cameras in the future, not the Faro system, but the LPR,
The LPR
license plate
system.
readers. Those are like a force multiplier. They're not really accounted for in how we do our model right now, so I think I keep jumping ahead.
No, you're good. I did wanna go through, the tax rate history, so I do have the tax rates, since the inception of the police department. Of note in '23, that was the first tax increase of 12.2%. As you can see, the breakdowns there, the largest part was to set up a vehicle replacement fund, so we every year are contributing about 700,000 into that replacement fund. And then last year in 2025, that increase was to address, just inflation, that was occurring within the department. And then finally, because I still see this on social media and it's been a number of years and you think it's been dispelled, that it would be cheaper for us to still be with UPD. So at the bottom is the tax rate of Slovisa right now, or last year at 0.002246, which is, a little over 50, it's over 50% of our tax rate, so. Just a little
Sorry, we
note
go
on that.
back real quick.
Yeah.
So then, after just looking at numbers and you look at that and say, okay, well, we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 6 years before an increase of 12.2, and now we're talking about nearly that much over the course of this year and next year. I think that's and don't mistake me, I'm gonna push back plenty on these numbers, especially when we get to the public meeting. But I think that it's papering over the fact that in those early years, there was some, I don't wanna say it, but I have to, there's no other way to say it, there's a little bit of creative accounting going on where the city was subsidizing the police department from the general fund.
Correct.
Right, so part of that reset is what I'll call it in 2023 was we're gonna stop doing that and we need to set up these funds properly moving forward. So it's not like all of a sudden we're having these needs. At that time, we kind of reset things and started doing it at least to me, the right way and not taking from the general fund. Now, one other aside that I'll keep kind of throwing in is as we grow our sales tax base, and it'll take quite a bit of time for us to get there, we're just starting to get some momentum. But that's the only other lever that we have to pull to offset these things that are solely dependent on property tax. So as we get into budget discussions on wanting to do other stuff that's, I'll say on the funner side of things, like that's the one source we have to help offset this burden on the residents.
Yeah, but the sales tax are gonna have offsets on
I think your pressures throughout the entire organization, so.
We're not gonna do fun stuff for a while, let's be honest, we're not gonna be able to build fun stuff for
Excuse
years.
We're actually.
Other than out of Parky impact.
I'm just gonna keep putting that in there, like, just to keep that in mind, that it's not just extra money. I've heard of our neighboring city, I've heard some of their council members talk about, oh, we have this extra money, we can go and do all these things. Well, it's not, there's no such thing as extra money in the budget, right? So there's pressures on all departments, but that's the only other really source we have.
Well, one thing that we haven't even looked at or even budgeted yet is your own facility at some point in time.
Yep.
That extra layer of that, if it's next door or if it's down the street, whatever that looks like for that facility.
And
So
I
it's-
did have Trevor just provide some guesstimates on what an increase
Don't bring the mood down.
would be if we were doing a building. I'm not gonna share it if that's gonna be. But we have
I
been
just
looking at
feel
that,
pretty
what
good
is
about
that,
where we're at.
what does that look like? Because remember, what they're in is really a precinct building, we don't have a true evidence area like we should. There's a lot of things that we're going to have to deal with in the future, but we're starting to look at that and how do we function because of our geography issue. We've talked a lot about kind of a hub and spoke where we maybe build a smaller headquarters, but then build some landing pads for those teams eventually, so they don't have to come back to City Hall every time they do something. There'd be a place for them to go to deposit evidence, do some stuff like that, and then you have your central staff going and picking it up instead of bringing your officers all the way back in. Our South Jordan is doing that. We're stretched kind of linearly, diagonally, they're stretched east and west. Given the way east-west boundaries work here, I'd rather have a north-south stretch than an east-west stretch. It is we're thinking through all that, so as we come to it, there will be a moment where we do talk about the building and what does that look like, and I think there has to be some real conversations with the public about what that looks like for these services. Because we do collect some money for impact fees and future growth, and it is a pittance to what the cost of the building will actually be. So, yes.
Now, moving over to the philosophy question. So as we've discussed, we've had a philosophy of new growth funding being used for new officers and equipment supplies for those officers. One issue we're seeing as staff is it's not accounting for other operating increases that are due to both staff and population growth. The largest example we have is certainly dispatch, because we do know some of that increase is due to additional residents. It is, however, difficult to quantify. We know what the increase is, and we know what the number of calls is, but is that due to having new residents or
And they set our
other
fees
factors?
off of calls for service and the number of officers. It's a weighted scale. We have, on the board, have been talking about if that still accurately reflects the demands. But so if we're growing, our increases can be higher than inflation simply because we are adding population and some of the other cities in it are not. And so that skews the number a bit.
The weighted formula is interesting because there are times when it works against you, and I think this year is one of those times, because our number of officers didn't change from last year to this year. Our calls for service actually went down because we took a lot of the administrative stuff from code enforcement and animal services that's being managed in Comcate now, so it's not hitting the dispatch system. So our calls actually went down, our officers stayed flat, but our assessment went up because it's a weighted percentage, so.
Yeah, so it's.
And then another question as staff we were thinking about is what about initiatives that delay hiring of staff? This is a small example, but looking at grammar request software, in theory, this would allow us to delay hiring civilian staff that are record staff to fulfill those requests, because those are all handled down the police department. Jackie's probably very thankful they don't have to route through the recorder's office. But it's items like that, things that might actually save us money down the road. Would that be eligible for new growth funding? And then, as I had mentioned earlier, where our personnel costs are already exceeding cost of living, that also, I'd almost say goes against, but I know the council is looking at what that COLA number is, and we're already, just with our normal increases in salaries, we're already going over a normal COLA number, so.
The amount that we charge for grammar requests as a percentage, how much does it cover?
It's in
Very-
statute.
Like,
Yeah, I think
Very
it's
little.
set by
like 25%,
state,
30%, I know it's set by statute.
It's set by statute. The issue that we run into is, and in fact, this last week has been interesting, in the grammar world. If you pay attention to the Twitter sphere, we've gotten about 58 to 60 grammar requests in the last 7 days. And 45 of those are related to one specific case from 2023. However, when it's a media request.
Yes, no,
that's so awesome.
That must be a social media.
We might have arrested a social media personality who was supposed to be on The Bachelorette, and yeah.
Yeah.
International meter requests from the UK and Australia and a bunch of other places, so.
West Jordan's getting them now, so it's okay.
It's like court fine revenue, right? It's a very small percentage of the actual cost of doing business. Plus, in the grandma world, there are actually expectations because of, and rightfully so, the public interest in knowing what's going on and those records being public, in the public domain. For media, for victims of crime, there's a whole category of people that fees are actually waived for, in the interests of public information. So the amount of money collected is very small percentage of the actual cost of doing the work.
We can touch on your point on the COLA, saying that it's higher than average right now, right? So that's part of
Right.
the issue of why we're looking at a little bit higher tax increases that we're looking at giving our people a little bit higher than average COLA. So anybody stop me at any point if you wanna explain this better than me or in a different way, but again, traditionally, what all of these government entities do, and I'll just go back to police and fire where I've sat in these boardrooms and just wanted to gouge my eyes out. Every year when we talk about this, is it's always a guessing game and a fight with I'll say on fireside labor, right, personnel, we want more. Well, inflation is this, well, what is everybody else doing? And it's like this big guessing game to try to keep up with the Joneses sort of thing. And it's all over the place, it's unpredictable. And especially with public safety, we end up going through kind of a boom and bust cycle with wages and personnel. So the last couple of years, we saw it and really everywhere in the city, right? We went through this boom where we've got to catch up. Everybody else is paying people, 10% more, in some cases 20% more to try to attract new officers or new personnel. Well, we've got to keep up with that. And then the next budget is, well, what are they doing next year? Well, we think they might do this, the rumors of this, so then we've got to do this to try to keep up, and it just gets out of control to the point where we can't go back to the well anymore, right? The public is gonna say, nope, no more, and then somebody else sits in our chairs that says, that's why I'm here, is to make sure we don't do that anymore, and then we end up laying people off, right? Or we end up top heavy, right, and we drop that level of service, so we go through it. So what we've started to institute is, this is a 10-year rolling, right? So instead of looking at just every year and having that fight, everyone knows what we're gonna do. We're looking at that CPI number for a 10-year rolling average. So the last year rolls off, new year comes on, and that's the average we'll look at doing every single year. So we're at the tail end, in fact, it's probably gonna go up the next 2 years because we have 2 really high years of inflation and 2 really low years that will roll off. And then the next couple of years, we're likely gonna stay in this 2.5%, 3%. So we're gonna be in this range for a while. The idea is that if we do that consistently and we know what that is, then it's predictable, we can plan for it. And it's smaller increments that keep us in that mid-range that we just talked about, rather than dropping and getting up and dropping. So just trying to smooth it out a little bit. Having said that, you guys have had a discussion where we have adjusted that a little bit. We're still trying to keep that average, but recognizing that it's higher than average and maybe a little too much right now, instead of getting us up to that 85, that's too big of a jump. Let's get back to that reasonable amount.
That was a market request, so we're still at 3.21. And I think that works out fine, because if other cities are doing in the 2.6 and 2.4s, we make up ground in the years that we don't. This real challenge is that with your steps, before we even, as soon as we just put this standard COLA on, your tax increase is higher than this inflationary number.
So if we
That's
only
what
had
we're
to do the COLA, our tax increase would be less than the 3.3, right? But when we're adding the COLA with the steps, now we have newer, to your point earlier, now we do have a stable of newer officers that are moving through the steps. We have the combination of the two hitting us.
Yeah, and you'll see this in this chart, and then we go the next year, well, that step decreases a little bit, but it's just a challenge. If we don't do anything, as officers are here and they're moving on, and as we get to, in theory, you're paying them more for their experience, right? Their ability to do things. We just have kind of that auto increase happening that we just have to account for. So we're trying to, by breaking it out, instead of saying, here's the cost, we're trying to give you as much data, hopefully not an overload, but so that you feel like you know what's going on. And so if you're someplace and somebody says, well, what'd you give your police? Well, ours is automatically, hopefully you have enough, you can have that conversation as to why.
So is it the same COLA for all city employees as is for public safety? Okay.
So it's just that, it's that 10-year CPI average, which was 3.21 this year.
And are we unusual for doing that? I know the States was 2.6 this year.
And most places are doing, are just the annual. What this does is you'll have years you're above and years you might be below what's going on because it's an average. The 110-year average for CPI is 2.95. So I've always, throughout my career, I was always told use 3% for your planning. I think it's because you get, the larger your data set, it gets close to 3. So eventually it'll all average out.
So where at least I feel we've been behind sometimes other agencies, doing it this way in the next few years, we'll do 1% higher than others, will kind of catch us up and keep us in that range rather than just matching what everyone else is doing and then having to do a big market jump. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but your question is, do we wanna keep doing this because at least what I'll tell you, I think that's gonna be the case for the next several years, 4 or 5 years, we're going to be 1% or so higher than the others. So I think it's a good question to bring back to us every year.
Right, and we will. You'll see something similar every year. Even though next year or 28, we won't be we won't have a formal budget, but we will have salary increases and we will go through the same process.
I will say for fire, they fought to have a 7-year average instead of a 10, so I told them I will be here for the end of that 7 years to make sure that they go to the lower number.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
It's a promise.
So that ends police. So this moves on to what we call it non-police and finance. I don't necessarily, I'll need to think of a better term, but finance people aren't creative, so I'll go talk to communications and maybe they can help me out on that. These are the departments that are funded by the general fund, so they are not being funded by HCC. It is general tax dollars that are funding these services. So first discussing animal services, as you can see, their expenditures stay pretty flat in 27, only a $3,800, $3,900 increase. It does increase in fiscal year 28, and we'll discuss that in just a minute on what the majority of that increase is for. So the main one, I'm talking about efficiencies, is request for the animal control module to our Comcade software. So that'll be $10,000 in 27 and then $6,000 in 28, and of course there's an annual fee, because that's how software is now. The largest increase, and I'm sorry, that's not 26, that's 28, it's a typo, was with anticipation of the new shelter opening, increasing the animal shelter and care operating line item by $15,000, anticipating that there will be new supplies that are needed for the shelter.
The one thing we see in the year not shown on this is once we move out of the rental space, we will save a portion of that. We'll need some of that money to essentially operate the new building from a maintenance and janitorial standpoint, but we're and we'll talk about that shelter 103 with capital. I think, I'm trying to remember if we had that on here.
I didn't put it in
So
slides, I
we'll
should
talk about it in
have.
capital, we had the cars, that's what it was, we had the vehicles.
Is that what we're calling it, Shelter 103?
I don't know
Yes,
what
it's
we're
been
gonna call
floated.
it. Again,
It's not fit for them anymore, but it's fit for the animals.
I haven't come up
It's being
with,
remodeled.
it's the animal shelter, future animal shelter. We'll have a symbol that says formerly known as Station 103.
I like Shelter.
In community services, the increases are a little higher than animal services, unfortunately. As you can see, it's, if you net the revenues and expenditures, it's about $65,000. We'll get into some of the details. You'll notice it goes down to 5% increase in fiscal year '28. So the major personnel driver is because we do have new employees, we have had a turnover in community services. The old employees that were here were not taking city insurance. We do offer a cash out plan, however, it's only half of the cost of that insurance. The new employees are taking insurance, which increases our benefit costs. And we do budget on what the employee is taking. We make the assumption that they are going to stay for the budget cycle. We do have a very low turnover rate. It really hasn't been an issue. But when you have a department of two and both of them leave and they're both taking city insurance, it does increase the cost. Another thing is, as you are well aware, more of the cases for community services have been going to our administrative law judge. Commander Adamson has discussed this earlier about us going over budget in that line. So that $15,000 increase helps to account for more of those cases going to the law judge. And then in software subscriptions, they do want to implement the Comcate AI module. As I mentioned, the animal services module is shared between community services and animal services, and then also there is a 5% increase in the contract every year for the contract term.
Can you talk just a little bit about that software?
Yeah, so Comcate, and BA is certainly the resident expert, but Comcate is a case management software where we're putting all of our administrative enforcement functions. So anytime there's an animal code violation, civil code enforcement violation, a parking violation, all of those now at the council's direction are being handled administratively, where that ordinance was adopted a while ago to shift all of that out of the criminal system. And so we intentionally bifurcated record systems essentially so that we're not keeping those civil administrative penalty cases, people's information, license plate numbers, dog license stuff. We're not keeping any of that in the criminal justice database. It's all being managed in Comcate. And so with the case management piece and all of those cases now going to the administrative law judge, there's an increasing cost for that. The new module that BA can speak to is really to help us identify a lot of efficiencies with our staff time so that they're not spending as much time answering phone when people call. It's an AI tool, the same that you're gonna see shortly implemented at BEC for dispatch, and that we've seen in a lot of other customer service-based industries where you call the number and the AI tool essentially walks you through a series of questions and prompts to get you the information that you need or get you to where you need to be without having to take up our staff time answering the phone. So there's a cost for that, obviously, with that module, and to incorporate that into our existing Comcate contract, which by itself, like Kyle said, has an elevators.
Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. So, yeah, we started with code, strictly code enforcement in that software. Then when we moved parking into that software, we added that piece in '25, I think June of '25. We currently are in a pilot program with Comcate that we started this month with their AI phone system. And so we've merged all of code enforcement, parking, and animal into one phone line where it was three before. And it's an automated system that allows the citizen to call in, and it will prompt you with questions, and you can input all your information, and it will create a case and put it in a holding queue for the officers. They can also get through to a live person. And we worked with Scott Munson to facilitate that phone tree so that we had somebody on the other end of the phone during business hours. We're about 2 weeks, a week and a half into that system. So far, it's working great. We have a follow-up meeting with Comcate tomorrow. So we're hoping to add that, but we're in a 6-month pilot program with them. We'd like to add that into this '27 budget. And then the animal piece, we've actually moved all of the civil animal cases into code. The animal piece will unlock the data capturing piece. So when we added parking, it allows us to research VIN numbers and research license plates through publicly available options and to track that on the back end, so I can look and see how many times have I dealt with this car, how many times have we issued a ticket. This will give us the same capability with animal to run a dog license number internally in the system, to run a dog, to capture dog information. Currently, we've got that in our shelter buddy system, but that is housing software, if you will. That's what we're using to run and manage what's in our custody, and not what we're doing enforcement. It doesn't do an enforcement piece, and Comcate doesn't do a custody piece, so you're kind of trapped in no man's land. But this will allow, like Cody said, all of that administrative stuff. We work together with our administrative law judge. His paralegal has access, a license to get in. She can pull all the cases to prep for court. We're ready to go. The only animal piece that remains in our police system is a criminal violation. So an animal attack, an animal bite, a significant animal abuse or neglect case that would be a misdemeanor or potentially even a felony case would still go through the criminal justice system. But this is a much faster system. We have an online payment system with Comcate now where you can pay your parking ticket with the QR code. So it's I think moved that along a lot faster, made it a lot smoother for everybody.
I think Mayor Palmer has a really calming voice, and maybe we should look to integrate his voice into the AI, so when they answer.
I'll just give him the number.
Mayor Palmer.
Yeah, just forward it to his number. Do you want the number, Mayor? I'll write it on your hand.
Thank you for calling Harriman Services. Welcome to Harriman City. If you've lost your dog, press 1.
So last two departments are emergency management and the crossing guards. No, they don't go together, but they're pretty small departments. So as you can see, the crossing guards, the $15,000 increase in personnel is due to the three allocations, contingent allocations that the council had approved in December. And then there were some minor operating increases that we'll get to in a minute. And then also on the personnel, we do budget for them to receive that COLA. And then on emergency management, you'll notice there is nothing in the personnel. The proposal is if the commander position is approved, we would eliminate that emergency management position because the commander would be taking that, those duties on. And as you'll see, there was no request for an increase in operating and emergency management. I did put on here so that we would save about $36,000 by eliminating that emergency planning specialist. And the general fund portion of the commander is about $127,000 the first year, and then it drops to $93,000 after that. I will give the police department credit. They are helping track the crossing guard expenditures greater than in the past. When we did split the crossing guards out, they were intertwined into police. We did our best to split those costs out, but they've done a really good job on making sure anything crossing guard related is going to that budget so we can track those costs. So this, those three items, they are a normal expenditure that the police has been paying, but now we're just making sure they're getting tracked properly. With that, any additional questions, comments, any concerns?
I think I've got mine.
So I should say the first proposal that came in place, they just put the things in, we put the numbers on, it was like 12.5% tax increase. We met, challenged them to come back, and I think this is still a very, very lean budget to provide the services that people expect. We get calls all the time, I want an officer here to do this, I want an officer. Those all come with a cost, just so, kudos to the command staff there for doing that. We resisted my normal slash and burn approach and said, you guys go back and do this and that, instead of me doing it, so.
I don't have anything else for now.
Thank you.
For now.
Sounds good. Do we have time to get to our close before?
What do we have left? We still have one more item.
Oh, we gotta do Trevor.
You got Trevor.
Sorry, I didn't forget about you. I did, okay. Okay, 2.2, city status report.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Kyle. It was a lot of fun. All the creative finance people are in jail.
Yeah, that's true.
Status is good. Today, I went up to the challenge staircase and
How many laps?
Did you look at it or did you do it?
so So I have photo evidence of me being up at the top. It's not AI generated.
Could you hand your
He
phone to
asked
somebody
it one
else?
time.
This one, only the once. I am proud to say though, it's a humble brag, but carrying the twins for 9 months up and down stairs prepared me pretty well. It wasn't
I
much.
thought you did the stairs with it.
I thought that's what you were gonna say too.
That's
Next
the next
time.
flex, that's the next flex. Okay, tonight I wanted to spend just a bit of time on the vacancy rate, just to explain that a bit. Why? Because later on you're gonna go over the transportation master plan, which has a population number in 2025 that's closer to 68,000 is what it shows. And the vacancy rate really does help to explain a big portion of that delta, that difference there. The vacancy rate is a look at our water meters and a rolling 12-month average of the proportion of meters that are reading 0 for 3 months versus just the total meters that we have recorded. And every demographer or everyone that's looking at sub-county population estimates is applying some sort of vacancy rate to their estimate. For example, the Gardner Group and the Utah Population Committee use just kind of a 1% blanket number that they throw out there. And so in order to try and keep our estimate a little truer to what we actually think is going on, we use the water meter data to correct it in an appropriate way, we think anyway. So,
Assuming if it's not been used for 3 months, nobody's in that house. It's for sale, it's being remodeled, whatever.
so happy to take questions on anything you've got. If not, thanks a lot and happy birthday to Teddy.
Thank you, Trevor.
I love this report, this is one of the best thing they've ever done.
We love to go back to an agenda item.
Not at 7 o'clock.
I did, it'd take 30 seconds.
What do you got?
1.2, can I go back to 1.2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Add a future.
No.
30 seconds. We were touring the water tank today, and Justin and I were like talking, we're talking about our cool little water dashboard we have.
That's what my future agenda item is.
You'd like us to
Water.
do a,
No, here's like, I think that tool, as a way to introduce that tool, to figure out a way to incentivize conservation of the water and have a contest to see as a percentage of usage, we can go back and look at last year and have a contest that's citywide, that we take the usage as a percentage from this year to last year. And I don't know, the top X amount of residents that reduce that get some sort of prize. I don't know what that prize is.
How hard is that to get that information? Is that pretty easy?
Each meter?
I don't know how much history that system keeps.
That system doesn't have a ton of history, but we have the metering data.
Is it hard to get though?
I don't know, we'd have to look at it.
I mean, to pull cause you'd have to pull every resident last year versus every resident this year.
It would
The
be
ones that
difficult.
probably entered in, I guess, so it would probably be
Oh,
a
that's true.
enter
Do an
and.
application.
I think it'd be a great way to introduce the dashboard to our residents and provide a way for them to use it and also incentivize the conservation.
Do we have data of who's looking at that?
Besides me, I don't
The
know.
Oh,
website?
how many people? We have about 700 people registered
Clicked
right
into
now.
it?
So we put it out in the bill. But
So maybe talk about, maybe see if that's, again, we wanna try to keep sensitive to staff and your capacity, right? But that's something that we can pull.
I don't know, it needs to be an agenda item.
What's the cost to put it together?
Right.
But I like that.
I think it'd be one of our education points too at town days.
Something about.
Just see what you think.
I'll just switch facility or switch from your primary to secondary.
Winner.
Or kick some more kids out of the house.
That'd be, oh man, if only.
Okay, we'll look for motion
That'd
adjourned.
save me on household
motion to adjourn.
repairs.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We do not close.